So Appalachia is full of characters, unique people, very colorful, stand out in your mind. And today we're going to talk to one of them, a family friend. So we'll find out a little bit more about him. I'm going to ask him some questions. So you can start with what's your name and when were you born and where do you live?
Well, my name's Josh Griggs, but the problem I had from when I was born forward was my folks, I was a miracle baby for them. They didn't think they were going to have any children, so when I was born they thought I was the only one. So they gave me 5 names. So my real name is Jonathan Charles Joshua Lynn Griggs. With a name like that you don't need a social security number. And surprise, surprise, 3 years later when my other brother was born, they got to be fair to him, so they gave him 5 names. And then 3 more years later my littlest brother was born, and so they gave him 5 names too. So it's something else, but I'm just Josh Griggs.
And where do you live, Josh?
Right now I live in Ducktown, Tennessee, just about 5 miles from where I've lived all my life.
So you said you had 2 brothers, so tell us a little bit about your family, about your parents and your brothers.
My mother and my father, my dad worked in a carpet mill in Dalton for all of our lives and before we were born. He was John Griggs, and my mother was Alice Rebecca Griggs, or Alice Center, that was her maiden name. And she was born and raised in McKaysville, Copper Hill, and that's where her people are from. My father's people were from Atlanta and LJ. So.
What about your grandparents? Did they live nearby?
Yes, my grandparents were business owners in the Copper Basin. They had actually 2 generations of business owners. The Centers, they had a dry goods store and a coal store. They sold coal, and then in later years, in the later 60s, it converted from a dry goods store to a paint store, kind of like I guess Sherwin-Williams now, but it was independent paint contractor store, and we did a lot of paint contracts for the company and all kind of stuff like that for the area.
Did you spend a lot of time with your grandparents?
Oh yes, all the time. We all lived in the same piece of property. My grandparents had a house, and my mother and father built a house on the backside of their farm property, and grew up around them my entire life.
So when you said the company, you sold paint to the company, yeah. I assume you're talking about the Copper...
Tennessee Copper Company, or Tri-Cities. No, it was City Service is what they call it, but yes, it was the Tennessee Copper Company.
So, but the copper mine, most people
yes.
just think of it as the copper mine.
Yes.
So, I know in my family, my mother's family, a lot of her brothers and uncles and those kind of people, they worked there. So in your lifetime, tell us a little bit about the company. Was it still going strong, or had it kind of died out? Or?
I was born in 1988, so it was closing right around the time I was coming into this world. They were doing a staggered closing. It was everyone knew that it was closing down. The reason it closed down was actually it was political is what it was. It was there was still plenty of years worth of ore in the ground. That's always been the story. I heard somebody tell me one time there was at least 200 years worth of copper left in the ground around here. The problem was copper became cheaper in Venezuela, Brazil, places like that, and the copper could be imported here and not have to be dug out of the ground and dealt with the EPA, and so it started slowing down. And they were still selling acid out of the acid plant when I was born, and then by about 93, I'm assuming 93, 94, it was pretty well gone. That was the end of it.
But for many years, would you say that's really what created copper?
Oh, of course.
I mean, the town in McKaysville.
It was the heartbeat of the community. Yeah. At its height, there was, and this again was a little bit before my time, there was over 5,000 workers went through that industry. They went down deep in the ground. I'm no expert on the copper company by any means, but my grandparents actually got a tour because they sold so much paint. got a tour of the mines. They took them all through there, and I remember my grandfather talking about just how extensive all of that mine was, and it was a big operation, and they ran nonstop. There's pictures I've seen of, be it 3 a.m., at night, pitch black, and that company lit up like a, lights, smoke rolling out of it, everything. It was still very much a big industry, and that allowed everything. At one time, Copper Hill had like 4 car dealerships, just in Copper Hill, and then there was 2 or 3 clothing stores, and television repair, and it had its own radio station. And to be a town as small as it is, it had everything. It was basically the hub of Polk County. That's where all of the money came from. All the money flowed through that area. That's where the money was.
So compare that to today. I guess there's not as much industry or as much economy, a large economy.
The economy today is more tourism. People come here to kind of see the mountains and the cabins, and people that had big land stakes are now selling them off piece by piece and building cabins. Same as with our neighboring county in Cherokee County. Just it's more of a retirement area. Just out of my graduating class, there might be 7 or 8 of us left that stayed in the area and became the cook bakers and candlestick makers, to do the jobs. Everybody else moved away, and it's kind of sad, because I can remember my grandfather when I was little and we would go to town. My grandfather knew everybody because he graduated with his class, and the people he graduated with became business owners or went to the company. He'd say hello to somebody. I didn't know who they were. I was a baby, but I thought my grandfather was the president because he knew everybody. He was just involved, and that was just how it was. It was a very tight-knit community in those days, and it still is to a degree. There still is a lot of the old, I call it Old South, the old blue bloods of Fannin County and Polk County that still hang around and know these families, and they still stay around. But for the most part, I can walk down Copper Hill now, walk down Tennessee Avenue, and I might see maybe one person, if I'm lucky, that I know. It's just so many people. Sorry about that. So many people come in and out all the time.
So when you were growing up, was church a big influence in your life?
Oh yes, very much so. Let me silence that. Yes, very much so. Raised in the old Baptist church. We call them, sometimes it's called fire breathing Baptist, sometimes it's called church pew walking Baptist, but that's how it was. It was, hell was preached hot and salvation was preached regularly, and it was very much a real thing. It's not like it was now, and I'm not throwing off on any particular religion type or anything like that, but there was an old stripe of people. In fact, one of the pastors that I grew up around was a worker in the company. That was one of his things. And looking at it now, and when he's talking about eternity and talking about, when he was talking about all these things, I realize now what that man's faith must have been like to ride an elevator 1,000 feet down into the ground and walk around in a mine all day and not know if the mine might cave in on him, if he might not see his children again. If they lived with that every day, and so that made a very real experience for that person. And when that pastor got up behind the stands and got up to preaching, you could feel it. You knew what he was talking about was real. There wasn't a put on. It was real. So that was one of those things. So.
So a lot of times church is where people are exposed to music. You're a musical person. Is that where you were influenced by music, or was it from someone in your family?
My grandfather and my mother. And it was with church, but I have to back up and do a little explaining. My grandfather was a genuine guitar picker. He could really play. And my mother was she's still with us, is a fine piano player. She was trained to play. She didn't play by ear, she played by the book. But my grandfather played by ear. And before that, my great-grandfather was a musician. He actually wrote Southern gospel music, and one of his big songs was "I'm Living in Canaan Now." The Happy Goodmans got it and made it big. But he wrote that song, and he was a piano player. And as a child growing up, and he died in the 60s, but as a child growing up, I can remember people saying, "That's Claude Center's great-grandson. That's Curtis Center's grandson. That's who that is. Son, I remember your grandfather playing the keys off the piano. I remember your great-grandfather playing. I remember." And so that was that heritage. People talked about that and how well they could play. And my grandfather tragically passed away with cancer when I was in the 4th grade. He was as healthy as could be, and he never smoked or used tobacco or anything, but he developed cancer quickly. It ate him up. He was gone. And I was in the 4th grade, and I wanted to play the guitar because I'd lost him. That was my way of trying to feel, I guess, coping. I can look back now, and I wanted to carry that on, and so I worked really hard to try to learn it. My dad had some people he worked with, and they could play the guitar, and so Dad worked it out to where they could show me a few things on the guitar. And it's interesting, a funny story, and I guess I'll do a little meandering here, but maybe you'll like it. While we always had plenty, we never went without. I'll say that. We never went hungry. You can tell. I never went hungry. And we always had plenty, good clothes and all that stuff. Buying something like a professional grade guitar was just not feasible at the time because, again, my father was having to drive 100 miles to work, round trip, come home. And Dad found an interesting little niche at work. Everybody that was there started wanting breakfast. They was wanting breakfast, and Dad come. I don't know how it got started one morning, but Mom was always making Dad a biscuit and egg and bacon and whatever, and Dad taking it in and eat it, And he must have given somebody some of his breakfast, whatever, and they said, "Hey, get your wife to make me one." Hey, and before Dad knew it, Mom was making, and I'm serious when I say this, Mom was making 50 biscuits at a time for the next day, and she would make breakfast. And so Dad started selling biscuits, selling breakfast, selling whatever, and he used that money to buy me my first guitar. He bought me a Sigma Martin guitar. That was my first real guitar because I had something from the J.C. Penney catalog, to flump and bump and beat around on and try to learn a little bit. And when Dad saw that I was learning, so he sold it. Mom made biscuits and eggs and bacon and whatever, would make them to order, and Dad would sell coffee for him. And he had a little, over there in his shop where he was working, and people would come through and pay for it. And that's how Dad bought me my first guitar. I've still got it, and I think about that a lot. And he bought my middle brother Caleb wanted to learn how to play the banjo. He bought Caleb a banjo the same way. So that's always been very special to me because of that. But
so did you learn to play the piano from your mother?
Well, that was another thing. I always wanted to learn to play the piano. I could sit and listen to my mother play for hours at a time. My mother has a beautiful voice singing. And I couldn't make it work. I took a few lessons and I could not just make it happen. And so I resigned myself. I'll play the guitar and that'll be it. Well, I was going to the little community college in Epworth, and we had to write a paper one time. It was in a math class. I had to write a paper on the golden ratio. Pythagoras finds the golden ratio, and it occurs in nature, and it's the whole deal. And I'm at home, and I'm trying. My heart wasn't in it. I just didn't want to write the paper. I didn't want to do it, and I was just listening to Mom play, and I walked over there, and I was watching her play, and she was playing something in like 5 flats, on the piano. And I was watching her. I said, "Why are you hitting all those black keys?" And she said, "Because they're flats. I'm hitting the 5 flats." And I was looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. And it just kept, I couldn't get it out of my mind. I dreamed about that. I couldn't, a couple of nights. And get up and I'm looking at it, and it hit me one day. I'm like, I think I can make the golden ratio work on this piano, And I got to tinkering with it, and in about a week's time I had it hammered out, the rules on what you could do to play, and I wrote the paper and I got an A. And I was hooked then. I just, see what other songs it would work with, and I had a good time. I figured out Floyd Kramer's little style, what he did a little bit, and so I put that in there, and I just got to messing with it. And but that was later. I was in college by then, and that was something I messed with, and I still tinker with it from time to time. So, but it's all black keys. Play all the black keys. It don't sound bad when you're just playing it all at once, but if somebody tries to sing with it, you got to have a real high voice or a real low voice to make it work. So
when you were growing up, was school something you enjoyed?
Hated school. And of course now I'm a school teacher, so but no, I was the kid that hated school, and there's a long story on that. I don't know if you want me to go into it, or you do? Okay, well, I don't know if the camera can see or not, but that finger, all right there, all right, this finger's shorter. Well, when I was, gosh, I guess 2 months old, maybe 3 months old, Mom could tell you better, I had a little accident. My hand got hung in a rocker recliner, and it got completely, the finger tip end got completely severed on my right hand. And Mom and Dad, Mom talks about it still, heading down to Cleveland, with an infant baby screaming bloody murder, because his finger's been cut off. Anyway, they said, well, Mr. and Miss Griggs, we can fix it to where he'll have full dexterity with it. It'll just have a funny nail looking, and so I had and that's why this pinky's curved too. It was all wrapped up in a bandage for a long time. Anyway, when I get up into school, because of that nail and whatever else, and I was still trying to get it, I couldn't write worth anything. And I'm right-handed. So I get into I rocked along in school fine, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, but I got up in there and I had a teacher, and we didn't jive. She didn't see on my level, and I didn't see on her level. We just couldn't relate. And let me flip this phone off. Sorry about that. We didn't jive, and the thing then was to write on the chalkboard long sentences. We had to copy everything down in cursive then, and I couldn't keep up. And I would start, my hand would cramp really badly, and I would start on the corner of the page and try my best to keep it, and it would run all the way down to the other corner of the page, corner to corner, and I could not keep it going. I couldn't make my hand do what I wanted it to do. And that teacher was personally going through a hard time. Personally, she had other personal issues, and so I became the favorite target to be persecuted, I guess, in 3rd grade. And I can remember her calling my mother of an evening and telling her, your son just don't have it. There's something wrong with him. He's lazy. He's this. He's whatever. And my folks believed her. And I got a lot of whippings because of all of that. And I was trying desperately to keep up. Well, out of all that, they wound up putting me in special ed. And my folks, my dad, again, dad working in a carpet mill, mom working, she worked over at a nursing home. And they were, working really hard and trying to make a go of things. And they believed the professionals when they said your child needs da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But that was the bad old days in special ed when they took the burn-up teachers that, were about to retire or had something wrong with them anyway, and they put them down there. And so I got put down in special ed, and I stayed there from 3rd grade on up. And you get in a position like that sometimes, and you get to believing it yourself. And I got into middle school, and by this point, I guess that's where some of my humor developed. I should note that during this time, I give up to it, and I decided, well, by golly, I'll just make money then. I was a kid. So I started selling stuff at school. Again, I saw Dad selling biscuits. I saw whatever else. So I started selling stuff at school. And one day, it hit me that I could charge my lunch and keep my lunch money. And so I started loaning out my lunch money at exorbitant interest rates until my mother gets the bill one day. This wasn't helping my case any about being in special ed. I was, labeled a deviant. But my mother gets a bill that the lunch tab hadn't been paid in a month. And it really amounted up to like $30 or something like that. And Mom comes down and wrecks out my backpack. She finds $30 and then about $25 worth of interest where I collected. And so I got a whipping. And I think the money got redistributed to my peers. But you get to believe in that narrative long enough. There was some other things going on too. And you get to believe in that narrative long enough, so you just develop a way to deal with it, and you try to develop a sense of humor, and you try to shield yourself from it. Well, I got up to middle school, and by then I was hard-boiled. I was ready to just, I didn't care. I'd just give up to it. I'd been told I wouldn't amount to anything more than a pulpwood cutter. No offense to any pulpwood cutters out there, but that's a hard job. And I was told I wouldn't amount to anything. And I could remember my daddy telling me, after I'd sometimes believed it, Dad would whip me, he'd say, you are to never be like that. You will be a doctor, a lawyer, or a school teacher, but you will not give in to this. There were some hard times with that. And I got up into middle school, and I had a 6th grade teacher, and I won't call her by name, but she said, I will fail you miserably in 6th grade. And I had, she was a regular ed teacher because they had moved towards inclusion by then. I'll fail you miserably if you don't enroll in the drama club. And they put me in the drama club, and I wound up being the starring person in that all through middle school. Made best actor all the years. That's nothing now, but I got to get to do that, and I could memorize things quickly, and I'd give in to it. And by 9th grade, they kept me in special ed since 3rd grade. I made it to 9th grade, stayed in there. And I wanted out. I wanted to be a school teacher. That's what Dad told me I needed to do, and I really wanted to do that. And at the end of the year, after I'd run the whole 9th grade year, in those years they had the tracking system, and you went tech track or you went college track. And that was decided for you based upon your 8th grade year, based upon a recommendation from the teachers. Busted it my 8th grade year, hoping I could get on the college track, and when it came down to the end, I had a math teacher in 8th grade tell me, I just don't think you can do this. And she said, okay. Give in to it again. I got put in a tech track with all them rednecks, we used to, as Jerry Clower would call them. And they had already given up too. They were marginalized. You could see it now. And come into my 9th grade year, the end of my 9th grade year, and they all bring us in for a meeting. My own IEP meeting, I find out later. Because I was age, I could attend my own, and they said, They already had the papers fixed. They was already. I know how this works. I'm in it now. They already had the papers fixed. They said, well, Mr. Griggs, we're going to get you fixed up here. You're going to graduate and you're going to do just fine. I said, I want to be what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a school teacher. They said, you can't do that on this diploma. You need I said, I want a college education. And they said, Miss Griggs, they looked over at my mother. They said, Miss Griggs, what he's asking is impossible. She said, he's my son. And if he fails, but you let him try. Well, they said, well, we'd have to completely retest him. She said, retest him then. Well, they retested me. And I'll never forget a man who I'm very good friends with now. I made friends with him later, a doctor. They brought in a doctor, PhD, to test me. We're best of friends. I talk to him a lot. And he tested me, and he got angry with them, and he told them. They called us back in immediately. And they said, we need to apologize. A grave error has been made on our case. And they said, well, his mom said, what's the matter? What's the matter? They said, Mr. and Miss Griggs, they said, your son has 138 IQ. We can't find a reason why he was put in special ed other than him having a little deformity with his hand. And we're sorry. And they put me college track. Well, I'd already lost a year. 9th grade was done. I had 3 years left. That was it. So I doubled up on everything. And I graduated on time with my peers. Not first out of the class. I wish I could have been first out of the class, but I think I was probably, I was in the top 20. And there was a class of 210 or 20, something like the big class. One of the biggest classes come through Fannin County Schools. Graduated on time with my peers in the top 20, with one of the only dual track diplomas ever issued by Fannin County School System. And that was my little victory there. I was proud of that, and I ran from special ed. I wanted away from it. I wanted out of it. I didn't want anything to do with it. And I didn't want anything to do with special needs or anything like that. I was put in there. I didn't want to be involved in it. My first job out of high school was working for a place called Burnt Mountain with adults with special needs. It's funny how the Lord puts you in places. And they had me over a work crew, in charge of a work crew in Jasper. That was my own age peers, but they had told them I was older, I was in charge of it. So I was having to drive from Fannin County down there every day and work with kids with disabilities, and we went into the school systems, helped the janitors clean, and I had to help them manage their money and whatever else. I did that for a few years, but couldn't get away from it. It's just always been in my life.
So when you went on to college to become a teacher, then that's when you decided that special ed's where your heart was.
I wanted to be a history teacher. That's all I've ever wanted to be. And the first thing I did, I knew that was going to happen. The first thing I did was enroll in college. We had a little community college out here at Epworth, and I got my 2-year degree. And the same thing happened. I've had this happen to me a lot. We had to take an introduction to college, and there's this lady, and I later became friends with her, but she was very haughty. She comes in there and she says, I want you to know, and she says this to everyone. She goes, don't take more than 4 classes. This is college. This is not a joke. This is not high school. You must, study, and you must this, and you must this, and this, and this. Okay. And she basically let me know, we didn't jive either. She let me know right away that this was not a game, and that we need to get it done. Well, I pulled the first semester, and she was the registrar. I pulled 4 A's. She didn't like that. Burn her up. And the next semester around, she put me in 6 classes. The very person that said that I couldn't do 4 puts me in 6. I pulled 5 A's and a B+. And then she put me in 10 classes. And she finally had me in everything, going, coming, trying to make me fail. And I kept pulling, and it just frustrated her to death. But I made my 2-year degree. And then because of the economy, that was when the economy had crashed in '08, they ran out of money and they started closing the school. And I was heartbroken because I felt like I was on my way to a teaching career. And I worked hard with now my wife. She was at the college. That's where we met. We worked really, really hard. We got petitions together, and we tried to get a state college to come in. And we tried it. I talked to then Senator Saxby Chambliss, and I talked to Chip Pearson, and I went on television, and I spoke at the Rotary clubs and the whatever else. I went all over making speeches and talking about being a college man and trying to raise money, and it just wouldn't happen. And the one thing that I worked really, really hard, and we finally, things got going. I didn't have anything to do with it, but they brought in another school there for a little while. It was another private school, but they just couldn't, they weren't together. They just didn't have it together. And I was in there, and I sat through one class one time, half a semester, and had already paid the tuition, and they didn't even have me registered for the class. I became very frustrated. In that time in my life, I felt like the Lord had me in a waiting period, and I wanted to move on. And I got angry, and I left. I got outside the school, and I closed the doors. I looked up at heaven. I looked up into the sky, and I said, Lord, you called me to be a teacher. If you're serious, I said, stop wasting my time, and I'll stop wasting yours. Let's get on with it, shall we? And about 10 minutes later, I was in an automobile accident. And I was in a little pickup truck, and it didn't even hurt the truck. It bent the bumper a little bit. I don't know how I come out of that unscathed. The truck was in perfect condition. It was a little old cheap pickup truck I'd had. I think I had $800 in it. And it was the other people's fault. They had turned in front of me, and they were at fault. I get a phone call from the insurance company, and the insurance company gave me a check. I think it was for $5,000, and that paid my first year back to Lee. That was everything I needed to do to get back to Lee, and I didn't have a job then. I couldn't get a job. I'd lost my job with Burnt Mountain. They lost their funding. The school lost their funding. I'd had such a, got down, and then I got to go into Lee University, and I started out to be a history teacher at Lee. And I had a hard row. I couldn't make it. I couldn't make a go of it. I just had door after door close on me and there was a professor over in the corner just approached me and said, you ever think about doing special ed? And he just flew all over me. And I think I hee-hawed and horse laughed right there in the parking lot. I said, why not? Let's do it. And every door opened then. That's where I was supposed to be. And then later on, you want me to go into what happened? Well, I stay at Lee for a couple of years, and I'm getting through the classes, and I was coming on down to my practicum placement. I need to be put places, and I wanted to be put over here at Ducktown because it was easier. And I had the licensure specialist. Now, he was one of these guys that was a hard apple. You couldn't do anything with him. Bald-headed as an onion, and looked like he had just mean. He just looked mean. With a name like, Ira, you know somebody's mean. You just know. Anyway, I've changed that name, by the way. Don't anybody try to look him up. That's a different name. Thought you'd get me, didn't you? Anyway, he was the licensure specialist at Lee, and he was hard to deal with. He was a bureaucrat's bureaucrat, and you couldn't cross him. And he would not let me do my practicum at Ducktown because I'd requested it. He said, you'll go where I say. And he put me in one of Bradley County's middle schools that had over 5,000 kids. Over 300 kids in the special ed department, and then they put me down in intensive intervention. And right back where I had to deal with, right back all those years went back to where I was in 3rd grade, and I was there all by myself again, I had a hard go of it. We had kids that were just very, very pitiful in there, and that anybody that can do intensive intervention is angels in my book, because that's just, it's rough. And finally, I just had a terrible day. A terrible day. And there's a lot of color that went into that terrible day, but I can't tell you what happened. On the way home, I'd had it. I just could not deal with it anymore. I was just to my breaking point. And it's funny how when you get to your breaking point with the Lord, that, that's when the help comes. That's when the Calvary comes in. That's when I had me a little Cadillac SLS then. I thought I was hot stuff then, in college. And I was coming back up that river road, just pouring my heart and soul out to the Lord. You've called me to do this. I was throwing it back up in his face. You moved all these mountains for me then. Where are you now? Because I can't do this. I'm just Well, as I'm coming up the river road, I see little pings of gravel hitting my car on the new bridge section when you come up there now. These pings of gravel hitting my car, and as I come through, I said, just bring them on down, Lord. Just come on. Just take me on. I'm through. I can't do this anymore. And when I got back home, Katrina and I had just got married. That was our first year of marriage. I come on home, and I get in the house, and just exhausted, I sit down in a chair. My phone goes off the hook, and it was Dad. He was calling me. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. What's the matter?" And Mom was there, and she said, "You were at home?" I said, "Yeah, I just pulled in the driveway. I just got home." And then my phone went off again, and it was Katrina calling me. "Where are you? Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "The river road just fell in. You were driving right through a rock slide." Well, with that river road, and it took the road and all, everything gone, that bureaucrat at Lee had to put me at Ducktown, because I was there, and it just ate him up. But I always look at that. I know the Lord moved that mountain for me. I always say that's my mountain when I go down. That was the one that was moved for me. And the state had to come in and spend millions of dollars and put a new bridge in. That was done because I was needing it done, I reckon. But they put me at Ducktown, and I stayed at Ducktown for a month. Sweet people over there. I love that place. That was a walk in the park. The kids were great. The teachers were great. It was just, you could breathe again. And my wife got word that Cherokee County Schools was looking for a special ed teacher, and it was right up the road here at Ranger. I said, "Well, there's no way they'll hire me. This is October, and I won't graduate till December." She goes, "Go up there and ask them." And I sent in an application, and I got called. And when I got called into the interview, in there, and did my thing, did the interview, and I drove out thinking, well, they'll never hire me. And I wasn't back to Ducktown until I got a phone call from the assistant superintendent saying, "Can you start Monday?" I said, "I'd love to." I said, "But I'm not graduated yet." And he said, "Who do I have to talk to?" And I gave him the bureaucrat's name at Lee. I thought, boy, that's over with. And they made it happen. Raleigh had to talk to Nashville to make that happen. And they did. And I started October the 13th, 2013, and I've been there ever since. So. Long story. But.
Interesting story. So when you mentioned the drama and the humor, of course I already know you're a humorous person, but so one thing that I think you're well known for is your voices. So how did that come about? How did you I've been around people before that could imitate others, but I've never tried. I'm not one of those people, but you seem to be very, very good at it.
It hit me one day. I was a little kid and with my dad, and we loved to watch movies, and we would do movie lines. In fact, that's how Dad knew that I wasn't what the teachers said I was about being low. I could memorize whole movies from start to finish. couple of movies in particular. And I always had a fascination for old automobiles. And Dad discovers it. I'll go ahead and tell you, it was the movie Driving Miss Daisy. I loved that movie for the cars. I didn't know the themes above it. You know, I was little then. It just come out new. We'd seen it in the theater, and oh man, I just thought those cars were great. And I had a Power Wheels Jeep then. I was a kid, and a suit that I'd wear on Sunday to go to church, and I put the suit on. Got a little, you remember the cassette tapes that go in the, look like a briefcase? I got that and put it over in the Jeep, and I'd be driving around the backyard doing the movie lines, talking them out, and doing the voices. I just did it. I just was reacting that movie. And it just floored my dad. And Dad and I could jump from movie line to movie, different movies with different references, almost like we were talking a code to each other. I do it a little bit with some friends I have. Paul Wilson's one I can do it with some. It's like quoting books or quoting scripture or it's just quoting. You're quoting it and putting it in there. And then as I got older, I started studying characters, be they the President of the United States or just the person at your local tire shop. There's a character there. The more they acted out and the more colorful they were, the better it was. And I love to try to find out what they sounded like or how they walked or what would they do. And then I'd imitate the pastor at church. And I, not mocking or whatever, but just how would he say this? And I noticed that when the pastor at church, when he was talking, he was down here, but when he was up and excited in the sermon, he would be up here, and he would be talking, and it would get everybody tickled. And so I could just do that, and that's how I learned to play it off. And then in that interim time, when I was trying to get to college down, my now father-in-law, I was starting to date my wife. He had worked on the radio. He had been a morning personality on the radio, and they had hired him to do mornings at WLSB 1400 in Copper Hill. And he said, I've got to have a partner. And he thought of me, and he called me, and he said, you want to do morning radio? And man, I loved it. That was something I loved doing. And when he found out I could do voices, that was it. We did all kinds of voices. We had a good time doing voices. And
is there a story about, was it Jimmy Carter?
Brother Jimmy Carter, yes.
that you did one time that you,
well, I have
someone
to
else heard?
The owner of the radio station was Jimmy Carter's lawyer, I think it was. He was big wheel with the Carter administration, and he bought the radio stations, a bunch of them, as just something to play with. Anyway, I didn't know, and I didn't know he was listening whenever he was listening. And so for April Fool's one time, we developed a story that we ran. And this was when the economy was crashing. Obama had just got elected. Everything was rough then. People were losing their jobs. States' budgets were wonky. They were cutting everything back. So April Fools of 09, we got in there and we decided we was going to run an April Fool's joke and see who caught it. And so we come on there and we said that Tennessee was having to cut its budget back so much that they had closed one of its historic parks. More on the 9 o'clock news. And so we got the listener base ginned up. And I wrote up a story, and my father-in-law Alan wrote up a story. We worked on it all. And the story was that the Tennessee's National Historic Lighthouse was in disrepair and closed. Tennessee's landlocked. There is no lighthouses. For those of you that don't know, it's right up here and it's landlocked. Anyway, there is no such thing. And we said it was in such disrepair, and then Alan went he said, we need a president to have a soundbite for to talk about it. And we tried everything. We tried them all. What would George Bush say about it? No, that wouldn't be funny. Ronald Reagan had already passed away, so, well, we couldn't do him. We couldn't talk about that because he had already gone. They'd know it was a joke. We'd blow that. And Bill Clinton wouldn't care about a lighthouse, and so we didn't worry about that. And so we come down, we landed on Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter would be perfect. So, Brother Jimmy, let me be clear. Rosalind and I truly believe. And we did it, and I step outside the box, and I call the station back to do the voice, wash it through the phone line, call the board, and patched it in. And Alan goes in, we're live with Brother Jimmy Carter. I won't say brother. He said, President Jimmy Carter is weighed in. President Carter, it's great to have you on the air. Well, thank you, Alan. Rosalind and I are truly, truly upset that Tennessee has decided to close the lighthouse. If they had taken the stimulus money, if they had taken their bailout money, they wouldn't have closed that lighthouse. And it's just terrible. I've been talking to a doctor, and when we said this, we said he'd talked to a doctor who had had a plan to fix it, and the doctor's name was I See No Veritas. And to show you how dry my humor is, I See No Veritas is Latin for I See No Truth. Okay, and so we did that whole thing. We run the story. Everybody believed it, but A.D. Frazier was listening to it. And he called, he said, that's not funny. Don't do that ever again, So we had to be careful. It was all right as long as you was making fun of the other political party, but if it was A.D.'s party, you didn't make fun of them, But we had a good time with it anyway. It was fun.
So one of the ones that is my favorite, and the girls, Corey and Caddy's favorite, is Ninani, because we've all known people like her. Bless, just a lovely soul of a lady who maybe you met at church or maybe at the local grocery store or something. So how did Ninani come about?
Ninani she was a character we had on the radio that would call in and weigh in on a story one way or the other. And we took a composite. She was a composite character. Two of the three ladies have now gone on to be with the Lord. And so they're done lovingly, and it's done lovingly with a voice. But I pictured a lady, a southern lady, and they're a holdover from the time when it was socially acceptable to smoke. So that's number one. Number two, their hair is either platinum blonde or it's completely white, but it's yellow right here in the bang area because of the nicotine. Their hand always trembles just a little bit when they got a cigarette in there, and it makes little trickles of smoke as it's coming up there. That's part of it, And they've got the voice, and they'll look at you. They have these little glasses on, and they'll look at you, and when they look at you, they'll just cut you to the bone, just like, you better not ever even cut down on it. And they'll draw on that cigarette all the time. And their voice is way down here like this. And they'll do that number, and they've got dentures in or whatever else, and they'll blow that cigarette out. And they'll talk like that, and then they'll have words that they rely on. And a lot of times they never ask questions they don't already know the answer to. They already know the answer to what they're asking. They just want you to know that they know. And so they get in there, and so it plays it off. They'll come through. And they'll say, they'll come through. And my favorite thing to watch, and I saw it all the time and growing up in the South, was the funerals. Whenever there was a funeral, this was a community event. And they would gather in, and these little old ladies would be in there fixing food for the family. That's what you did. At some point in time in the 80s, we quit setting up all night with the dead and having the funeral at the home, and it went to an actual funeral home. And instead of setting up all night, you had your visitation, and then everybody brought food. Well, your problem is, this little ladies' social club of the church ladies got in there. And it's fine, and you're in good with the club unless you cross them. And if you cross them, your name is mud. And there's certain things you don't do. And the big no-no is you do not bring store-bought food to one of these funeral home food gatherings. You don't, or you'll be talked about. And I watched this happen, just being a young boy and sitting over in the corner and watching it happen. They'll be over there fixing food, and they'll go, "Hey, Lena, look here. Is that Inez's tray of food she brought?" She may think she's fooling some people. Everybody knows that chicken come from Ingles. She put it in a Pyrex bowl, but that ain't her chicken. She getting lazy. Terrible bad. And just look off, just mad. And their name was Mud for the rest of, and it just tickled me that they would be so intense with one little detail. And so I worked it off of that. And we got a good blend of that character. But it's so funny. And I've got the ladies at work, at school, the secretary, even my principal, everybody. I'll come through and I can key down on that little old lady and I'll just look and say, "Lord help, bless your hearts." Everybody knows about it. And you just walk off. If they'll say something, "Mr. Griggs, we got to do so and so and so and so." "Well, you know all about it. Let's go," and go on. So that's their phrases, and that's what we did. And I've had some good mileage out of it anyway.
So when you were growing up, did your family raise a garden? Did they put up food?
Lord help, every bit of it, sugar. We raised tomatoes and buttered beans and corn. No, we did all of that stuff. In fact, it wasn't a garden, it was a field. The difference between a garden and a field: a garden is 20 by 20. A field is 20 acres by 20 acres. It's a great old big thing. Lord have no. It was a big garden. It was always a big garden, and we cut corn and string beans and boiled beets outside in a pot with a fire, and watch souse meat be made. I've never been the same since. No, it's fine. I watched all that stuff happen.
That was just part of your
part of growing up.
Summer traditions, I guess.
Watched them kill chickens. That was the way the old timers did. I watched that go on. I even watched sugarcane get made one time, but it's just it was dying out then, and it's just not how it is now. My grandmother would can. Man, her house. She lived in a brick house, and she'd go to putting all the stuff up for winter, and she'd can, and that house would be so hot because she'd canned. I mean, she could have 2 or 3 pressure cookers going at one time running, but she always kept that stuff up. That was the big thing.
What about any other traditions did you have, your family, maybe Thanksgiving or Christmas or birthdays or something like that?
They were all traditional get-togethers. We all got together. We all ate, a big meal. That was just, the way things were. It wasn't necessarily a tradition one time, but I thought you might like this. This was before the days of the internet and before you'd know anything, how to just fix things up. My grandfather, before he passed away, decided he wanted to try groundhog. He had never eaten groundhog, and somebody had told him he needed to try groundhog. And my dad and my grandfather trapped one, caught one had been in the garden and getting into things. And they cleaned it and thought they could cook it to eat it. But what they didn't know was that there's a gland in a groundhog that you've got to cut out or else it will ruin it. Well, they didn't know that, and they get to cooking that groundhog. Ruined the house. It just, I think we had to peel the paint off the walls. You had to, fumigate the thing. It was awful. We had to sleep that night in the carport. It was that bad. It was rough.
So when you think about Appalachia, since that's where you've grown up, spent your life, when you just hear that word, what does it bring to mind?
Oh, wow. It's home. I didn't realize as a child growing up that people lived differently than us. I don't guess you do. That's the way it is. And it wasn't till I got older and got out and about a little bit to where I could see how things were so much different. I love it here. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I think that's why a lot of people are now wanting to retire to this little area and this little community. There's just something special about living up here in the mountains, especially and particularly this little region, in the 3 states, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. It's just a little special area, and it just doesn't happen all that much. You don't ever hear people retiring out to the Midwest and getting them a place out there. They don't retire out there. They don't retire to Chicago. They retire to Florida to a beach maybe, or down on the coast. And then when a hurricane or two hits, they decide maybe we want something a little less crazy, and so they meander up this way, and they found out what we knew all along, that you can travel a lot of places, but you only one home, and this is just home. But that's what I think.
So when it comes to celebrating that home, celebrating Appalachia, what do you think are the things that's worth celebrating about the Appalachian culture?
Well, there's a lot. This area particularly was settled by the Scots and the Irish and the Indians. That was, the Native Americans, this is where the Trail of Tears really started, in this little area. And the Scots, Irish, and Indians were, they intermarried. That's partly my family. I've got a lot of Indian in my heritage. That needs to be celebrated a lot. To me, just the rugged individualism that it took. We're living in a technological age now, and pick up the phone, I can find out anything I want to. I can do whatever I want to. But if you look at Copper Hill and just look at how extensive, for instance, those mines were, those things are over 100 years old, actually nearly 200 years old. And they dug that stuff out with shovels and pickaxes to start with, because they needed to get something to eat. This was carved out of nothing. That takes a lot. When you look at that big pile of purple dirt sitting out there where that company was, and just look what the people dug it out with their hands, and they cleared you clear a spot for a house now with a bulldozer in a day. These folks did it with a team of mules and shovels and pickaxes. I think that really needs to be celebrated. People have forgotten what it took just to get here, to get to this particular point and where we're at. And there was nothing here. So that's my thoughts. And we still got most of it left. Go ahead. Parker's an idiot. And then finally, about the 4th or 5th ring, she'd reach up, hello, blow in that receiver, blow that smoke out in there. And it was always, her phrase was, she always had one tore down. You'd have something broken, you needed to go somewhere, and you needed, like a universal joint, take 5 minutes to put it in, and you got the part. I just need you to do, Lord help, you're going to have to call back next Tuesday. They've got 3 tore down in there on the rack. And Harl's gone to Copper Hill to get parts. It's going to be ours before we even get back here. And you'll be in there. She's like, just take your magazine and wait right there. Ma'am, I really need it. I told you to wait. She come back to her cigarette, filing them nails. Where were we at? Oh, darn, they done got Virgil out of it. How'd that happen? Well, I'll watch it tonight when they re-air it. Flip it over to Oprah and sit there and watch for the rest of the day. You couldn't do nothing with her. You couldn't, like I done told you, you're going to have to wait.
It's on her turn.